Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?
Well, hi again, everybody. This is Rob Godlewski with the Think Small podcast. And today our special guest is Rochelle Friedman-Walk. And Rochelle is the managing partner of the Tampa office for Aegis Law, a law firm with multiple offices across the country. Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us on the Think Small podcast.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
So this will be a great conversation. Listen, I'd love to learn about how you um, got into law in the first place and how you ultimately got to Aegis Law, because I know that's a kind of an interesting story. And let's take it from there.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Do you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, I'm kind of a typical lawyer story. I went to college and had a couple of career path choices and really didn't think I would go to law school. But my father said to me, if you get a law degree, you can use it for so many different things and you can do so many things with your career. Whereas if you just like get a master's, in my case, of urban and regional planning was what I was looking at.
Hmm.
Um, that's pretty limiting in comparison to what a law degree will do for you, and you can probably do all of the same jobs. So I started law school as a JD MBA. I was going to do both degrees
Okay.
and got into it. And unfortunately, my father passed away very quickly into the beginning of my law school career. He was a very
I'm
young
sorry.
man, and I was pretty young. Thank you. It's been 43 years, and I made some hard decisions, and ultimately never finished the MBA. I have part of an MBA, but I never finished it because
Okay.
I just simply couldn't keep going in school. I couldn't afford another year of school. And that time I got married, and my husband is also a lawyer. He's a tax lawyer and a CPA. And I just had to make some hard decisions and accepted a job at a major Cleveland, Ohio law firm and went to work as a business lawyer.
Great.
Yeah. And spent the first part of my career very similar to other lawyers. I worked as a business lawyer, doing mergers and acquisitions work, general corporate work, a lot of financial transactions, representing both borrowers as well as lenders, represented a lot of lenders during that time. And then I was approached unexpectedly without looking for a job about 5 years into my career uh, by a recruiter who
Hmm.
gave me the picture of a job that sounded so good I couldn't say no to the interview. And what it turned out, he wouldn't tell me the company until I agreed to go to the interview, but it turned out to be an interview for corporate counsel at the Sherwin-Williams company. And my role there would be
Interesting.
mergers and acquisitions. So it was really interesting. Uh, I knew some of the lawyers there because I had done a transaction with them. And the
Okay.
transaction actually failed. So I was sort of surprised that they would be looking at me as a potential candidate. But the interview went really well. And I spent the next 9 years at Sherwin-Williams. And my father's prophecy of what you can do with a law degree turned out to be very true because I
Hmm.
worked as the mergers and acquisitions lawyer for Sherwin-Williams for a number of years. And then in the middle of one of those deals, the president of the consumer brands division said to me, "Have you ever thought about doing anything else besides being a lawyer?" And in that conversation, by the time we landed, we were on an airplane. By the time we landed, he said, "We're looking for a new director of marketing communications. Would you even consider something like that?" So the first question
Sounds
I
like a
had
very
is,
far cry from a M&A attorney.
you would think. So that was my first question is, so what is that? I'm like,
I love it.
What exactly would I be doing?" And he explained to me that a lot of the work was internal focused, that was writing white papers and helping internally launch this new division that was being created called Consumer Brands. And a
Okay.
lot of the effort was in uh, trying to get the employees and the other divisions to understand what we do, to understand our brands, to help create brand channels, to help really help with the strategy of how you go to market and how to communicate going to market with these very famous brands. So, of course, Sherwin-Williams is sold at Sherwin-Williams stores. That was a different division. This
Okay.
division was for all the non-Sherwin-Williams branded residential paints.
Okay.
So things like Dutch Boy and Martin Senor and Cuprinol and the brands go on, Pratt and Lambert, um,
Sure.
Thompson Minwax. I was the attorney that helped acquire a lot of those brands. So I knew those brands and
Oh,
I knew those brand strategies really well.
interesting.
So it was a great move for me after a few years of running marketing communications, which ultimately included all of advertising, sales promotion. I learned so much
Sure.
about business and so much about how business in a Fortune 200 company is run.
Right.
I learned a lot about investor relations because a lot of what I worked on wound up being put in front of investors and was used by the investor
Mhm.
relations group and the corporate development group. And ultimately, we went into a process of creating licensed brands. And the first license we were going to work on was with Ralph Lauren. And
Oh,
I had worked on that transaction when I was a lawyer. The person who was head of the licensed brands activities for Ralph Lauren was going to be leaving the company. And we had also started a Martha Stewart licensed brands group. And that person was put into a different job. And I became the director of the business unit called Licensed Brands, which was primarily Ralph Lauren and Martha Stewart. So I had a
interesting.
wonderful opportunity to run a P&L, to work with very unique product lines. For us, it was a little bit of a turnaround because while the Martha Stewart piece was doing pretty well, the Ralph Lauren piece was struggling financially. It was sold primarily through Home Depot. It was having some struggles. Um,
Hmm.
and, my job was to try to figure out what strategy we might take to turn it around. And we did, in fact, get it turned around. Um, a couple of years into that, there were some changes in the consumer brands group, and there was a decision made to no longer have this sort of licensed brands activity.
Okay.
During that time, we had launched a relationship with HGTV, and we were the first of their sponsors, and I was very involved in helping create that sponsorship. I worked a little bit on a show that we produced called Room by Room, I think, and
Okay.
early show on HGTV. I had the opportunity to work on that. And ultimately, the strategy behind what we were doing got kind of tucked into a few different places within Sherwin-Williams, some of which was taken over by the stores group and turned into activities for the Sherwin-Williams brand, and some of which was just terminated. One of the questions with Ralph Lauren for us was, could we make a real go of this? And it was very difficult for the way Sherwin-Williams was going to business at that
Yeah.
time. That license relationship, while it was a strong and lovely relationship, financially, it didn't make as much sense in the context and in the way that it was designed to run. So there were some changes made there. And I wound up leaving the company. I was given a few opportunities to stay with the company, but I chose to leave. And I went
Okay.
to another company, and I went in as director of corporate affairs and um, the company was called Oglebay Norton. It was an old mining and minerals company with freighters on the Great Lakes and mines all over the country, a few international,
Wow.
and
Very different than residential paint products.
really different, really different. And wound up very quickly after getting there. The guy that was general counsel was moved into a different job and was made president of one of the divisions.
Okay.
And I was asked to take on the added role of general counsel. So I wound up having all of investor relations, kind of back to that communications role, but as also the chief legal officer for the company.
All right.
And that company had a lot of balance sheet issues, including asbestos and silica cases. Like 50,000 of them because it's a very
Oh,
old
wow.
company. And it also had some other balance sheet issues. And we tried to restructure it um, outside of bankruptcy, but ultimately wound up putting it in a Chapter 11. And I was very involved in leading in-house the restructuring efforts with our CFO at the time. And
Okay.
we did a lot of the reconfiguring and rebuilding. A major part of my role was putting in place a settlement trust for the asbestos cases because we had insurance there, but the way that the insurance was structured made it very hard to get the cases settled um, and resolved quickly. It was also at a time where some of these insurance companies were starting to go bankrupt themselves. So by putting a insurance trust in place, we were able to secure adequate funds so that on our exit from bankruptcy, and then ultimately the sale of the company to a competitor, the sale was broken into a couple parts, different
Okay.
pieces to different people. Um,
Sure.
but we were able to actually complete those transactions because there was a clear insurance trust in place to secure those claims. And then once I did that, um, I wound up moving to Tampa, Florida. I was in Cleveland until then, and I became the chief legal officer and chief administrative officer for a company called Anchor Glass Container Corporation, which makes
Hmm.
the bottles for some of your favorite beverages. Everything from Anheuser-Busch beer bottles, and at the time, um, it made things like Maker's Mark and Snapple. If you imagine drinking it
Okay.
out of a glass
Interesting.
bottle.
Right, right. And some of
And
those products are very identifiable and have a visual connection with their brand for sure.
100%. And again, it's a consumer product. It's the
Yeah.
container for a consumer product. So a lot of my work, even with Ogle by Norton, related to things that ultimately turned into consumer products. And that company was interesting because it was in its third bankruptcy in 10 years.
Oh, wow.
My job was to get it out of its bankruptcy, close those bankruptcies, and get out of the way. I understood when I took the job, I'd only be there for maybe 18 months. It took a little over 3 years. Um,
Okay.
but I had an amicable departure and exit and found myself in a situation where I could either take another chief legal officer position. My husband and I really loved Tampa. Our kids were out of the house by then. And we made the decision that I would start my own law firm. And that's how I got to start Walk Law Firm. It's a kind of long story to get there, but so I became an entrepreneur myself.
Okay. Great. Big change.
Yeah, a huge change. And that was in 2011, 2012. I mean, I did some work with another law firm in Tampa for a short period of time, but pretty much right
Okay.
after leaving, that's what I did.
Interesting. So what led you then ultimately to Aegis Law, which is where you are now?
So when I started Walk Law Firm, it was just going to be me, and I was going to do some limited work. A friend of mine had kind of teased me and said, "Oh, I told him I would just be a mediator. I wasn't even going to do any legal work." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I have to take the Florida bar." And he said, "So you don't think you'll pass? You're not smart enough? You're like," he kind of teased me about it. And he actually came right out and said, "So you think you're stupid, huh?" And he said, "Lots of people
Wow.
pass the Florida bar, Shelley." You know? And and he's still a dear friend. And so on that challenge, I took the Florida bar. And what really happened is I pretty quickly grew the firm. I didn't really intend for it to grow quite that fast. I was really just looking for
Hmm.
something to do for a while. But with my experience in M&A and finance and my knowledge of consumer products, companies were just starting to sell their e-commerce businesses, and they were just starting to sell their Amazon businesses. And there wasn't really a clear path forward as to how that gets done. And the investment bankers and brokers who were doing these deals, those deals were very small at the time, $50,000, $100,000 deals. I mean, I'm used to doing, billion-dollar deals.
Multi-billions, sure.
Yeah, and it was interesting to try to navigate for entrepreneurs how you might sell what is effectively a bucket of air because while there's products, they may be private label products, The products may be sitting at Amazon, in a warehouse. They may be sitting in your own warehouse. What you're really selling is the right to um, use the Amazon platform to sell your business, to sell your
Right.
products.
So
And
you were really focused on the third party sellers for Amazon rather than the first party sellers.
that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I
interesting.
was focused on these small business people who built a business. They're on the Amazon platform, but they don't have ownership, if you will, of the Amazon account. It's a license with Amazon to be able to use that account.
Well, that's very true.
So we have to now navigate how does that account transfer? And needless to say, it wasn't obvious. And for the folks at Amazon, they had some real hesitations because while the accounts themselves belong to Amazon, if they got in the way of transferring when the whole business is transferring, they lost a really good seller. But if they let it happen, there was also a problem because if you just sold an Amazon account, the buyer of that Amazon account is an unknown person, and Amazon had its own diligence. It has its own concerns about who's selling in its marketplace and how that works.
Right, right.
So there needed to be some mutual understanding of the kinds of transactions and of when an Amazon account can be transferred. So, the language in their terms has in a bracket, Amazon accounts are not, and then the word in brackets, generally transferable. So the dilemma
So
becomes,
there's
well,
an
what the
out.
heck does that mean?
Right.
And so that's really what built my firm was figuring out what that means and figuring out, frankly, with the help of some very smart brokers and with the help of some folks in the Amazon legal department that I eventually got to know, a path forward of when it would be appropriate to let the account transfer along with the sale of a complete business. And that's really what it comes down to.
Interesting.
Is if you're selling a whole business, then the account makes sense to move with the business. It's when you want to just sell the account that it's a problem. The account itself is not really saleable. You can't,
So you
if I
really,
sold widgets and you wanted to sell, um, pens, and my account was for widgets, and I sell you my account because it's a seasoned account, and now you want to sell pens, Amazon sort of looks at that and says, well, wait a minute, it's a different seller, it's a different product, it's a different, what's going on here? This is not an appropriate transfer or use of our account.
right, right. Interesting. So you really helped kind of create a cottage industry for Amazon third party sellers to monetize their businesses.
Exactly, exactly. And it took some effort over time. Larger businesses, aggregators of Amazon businesses, especially in the COVID period,
Right.
but before that time and certainly through COVID, there were aggregators of Amazon businesses, and I represented a lot of those aggregators and worked with those aggregators in helping them build their business. And philosophically, what really became apparent is that these are consumer products companies. They are
Hmm.
just like Sherwin-Williams or Anchor Glass. I mean, these are consumer products that are being sold and or B2B products being sold for the use in the consumer world, like a
Right,
bottle for
right.
Anchor. And when you work on these businesses that way, you can be very successful. It's not really a fintech deal, which I think a lot of people thought that's what was going on, is that these were fintech companies. So we really changed the thinking on that. In about 2018, you had asked me about how I got to Aegis. I
Hmm.
had five attorneys working with me,
Okay.
none of whom were ready to take on succession. I was looking at a world in which I'd want to retire eventually. And while none of them really stepped up, even though I did ask if any of them were interested in looking at succession, I
Hmm.
ultimately wound up hiring a recruiter and said to the recruiter, find me a law firm that meets my needs. Here's what I need. And I gave him a list.
Interesting.
And he found me about 10 law firms that I talked to, and Aegis was the fit. Scott Levine, who is one of the managing partners of Aegis, still one of the managing partners of Aegis today. He and I immediately connected. We understood each other. We understood the kind of work that I do, the kinds of clients I represent, and paid associates and attorneys in a manner similar, not exactly the same, but similar to the way that I did. So it made for a much more seamless transition. They were just starting their growth. They were in St. Louis. It was they were a small firm of maybe 10, 12. I don't know exactly how many attorneys at that time.
Okay.
And adding my team, increased their size substantially. And since then, we've worked very closely together, and they've been adding attorneys and practices. Sometimes they buy whole practices like mine. Sometimes they just add one or two attorneys who are working together. But we've really built a beautiful practice together. Today, I'm guessing 45 attorneys, maybe more. We're all
Okay.
country. We're licensed all over the country. Most of
Yeah.
us have stories like mine where they were in maybe private practice, maybe general counsel, maybe at a major law firm like I was originally. Uh, all different. There's a handful of younger attorneys who have picked up and learned from us and helped get the work done. Um, but the majority of the attorneys are really seasoned folks who know their way around transactions. We're heavily focused on transactional work, corporate
Okay.
work, not-for-profit work. We do have a handful of litigators when we need them. We try hard not to need them, but they do have come in very handy when we do. We have a great tax practice, a good real estate practice, a venture capital practice, and it's been
Wow.
terrific for me. It's been 8 years.
It sounds like the perfect transition for a business or a firm that you didn't necessarily have a transition plan for. You were able to sell the firm to Aegis Law, and not only uh, maintain employment for yourself, but for all of your associates as well, correct?
Absolutely. It wasn't really a sale. I would call it more like a merger.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Okay. That's
because
fair.
I didn't get a purchase price, but what I got was a succession plan. I had a
Gotcha.
path forward
Understood.
that has put me 8 years later in a place where I can slow down and pick and choose what I work on. And I can do the strategy on the deals and have the confidence that the team and my colleagues that work with me are extremely competent, really talented, really thoughtful, and it gives my clients a path forward as I do go to retire. And when I'm ready to say I'm really done, there's a great law firm and they know my clients and they know what I do and they've been trained and worked with me on the kinds of transactions that I've been doing. It also has enabled me to take work that I never would have taken before
Hmm.
because I never would have taken tax work because I am not a tax lawyer. And
Interesting.
now we have a fabulous tax group and we can do all kinds of tax planning and corporate transactions that used to be sent out. We have a phenomenal venture capital and private equity team. And while I did some of that work, there's guys on this team. I say guys because it happens that they are guys. We do have women in the firm too, but there are guys in that particular group who really know that world. And I can, instead of co-counseling with someone or having concern that I might not know how the sponsor deal documents should look, I have a team that knows exactly how they should look. And I
Okay.
can literally hand off with confidence some of that work, stay involved with my clients, stay involved in the strategy, but have confidence that the work is being done at the highest level. Most of these folks have come out of the biggest firms and out of general counsel roles, as I said, and there's no lack of talent. It is just a solid group, which has made a huge difference in what I can actually do for my clients.
Sounds good. So if I'm not mistaken, you're still active with client work, right? Doing real legal work for your clients, but also doing
Yeah.
some strategic work for the firm. Is that right?
So some of both. So I do most of
Okay.
my client work is also strategic. I'm
Okay.
expensive. I admit it. I'm not, I'm not
You've
the
earned
low
it.
end of the hourly rates. And so most of the time my clients are looking for me to be involved in the strategy, but to have the heavy lift of document creation and drafting done by other attorneys. And and frankly, with the advent of AI in the legal
Hmm.
field, so much can be done with the assistance of AI. And Aegis is not afraid of using technology. So, we may engage AI for lawyers, specifically for lawyers, behind firewalls, protected. So we're really protecting information.
Right.
And we can be extremely efficient on transactional work with me setting a strategy and a team producing, the highest level of documents.
Interesting.
And then I
Interesting.
do some work with strategy for the firm and a lot of marketing for the firm, things like this. Have these conversations.
Absolutely. Well, great. So what does then, what does the future or the near-term future look like for Aegis Law relative to your role, right? What does the next 3 to 5 years look like for the firm?
I think it kind of continues where we are. One of my goals is to continue to help build. One of the things that I have found in business over a very long time, and no difference for a law firm, is you have to, know how to quickly pivot. And, things like incorporating technology and AI into our practice is
Right.
something we have to do. It isn't optional, but you have to do it smartly. You have to know how to protect your data and your information. Um, I think that's a role where we're working forward on that. So helping think of where we go next and how we go next, as well as in my case, helping develop the younger lawyers, making sure that our clients will be in a great place for business and have the right legal advice for the long term. As people like me, I'm on the older end of the attorneys, and as we start to slow down, and in my case, it's because I travel a lot. It's not that I'm slowing down; it's that I could be anywhere in the world at any time. And even though technology makes that very accessible, sometimes it's not during regular business hours. In this case, I'm getting ready to go to Asia, and I'm not going to be very available for the next 3 weeks. So I need to have some confidence that the team is able to represent and handle the clients as matters and as needs come up. And that's a major focus for me, is to make sure that that happens smoothly.
Interesting. So, in talking about AI and the implementation of AI tools into a business, right? It's a subject that we talk about constantly here on the Think Small podcast. And I have a very interesting collective approach from our business leaders and CEOs on this podcast about how they implement AI tools. But I think it's even more how would I say, it's even more appropriate and intentional with a law firm because as we know that the initial outputs out of AI need to be verified, they need to be validated, and they need to be tested.
Mhm.
So how are you implementing AI and the tools you use to not only make sure the outputs are correct, but make sure they're used obviously to make your lawyers more efficient and more productive?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think all law firms are struggling with. When I look
Right.
at the use of I like to think of it as a first year associate, and maybe we'll get to the point where I think of it as a second or third year associate, but today I think of it as a first year associate. And the reason I think of it as a first year associate is it's really only as good as the prompt and information you give it. It
Right.
takes significant training and development to make sure that what you're asking for is what you're going to get. Picking and choosing your prompt language is very important. Knowing what is and is not behind a firewall and ensuring confidentiality for your clients very important. You need to make sure that you've read the terms and conditions. I work with tech companies, so I do a lot of consumer products companies. I also work with a lot of tech companies. So
Okay.
we write terms and conditions all the time for websites. So it's important that you read those terms and conditions and make sure that the protections are there that you're expecting and that you need to protect your client and your client's information. And then when you get the output, it's like a first year associate. You've got to be the lawyer still. You can't abdicate your role as a lawyer, and you can't abdicate your role as a senior lawyer. It's my job to read it and read it carefully. And if there
Right.
are citations, it's my job to check those citations and make sure they're actual citations. I mean, we've seen in court where made up citations have shown up from AI, or inappropriate citations that don't really mean what they say. Well, just like in the old days when an associate would show up in my office and give me a citation and say, hey, we can rely on this case. I said, show me the case. Get me the case. Let me see it. If we're going to quote it, let's make sure, and in our lawyer terms, let's make sure that it's not in the dicta. Let's make sure it's actually in the holding. Let's make sure we know where this law comes from. If you're going to give me a citation of a law, let me make sure that it's a law that's applicable in
Right.
in the state and context that we're using it. I mean, I had one show up the other day where it was regarding, people love to record conversations. This is a favorite thing to do. Let's record the conversation. Well, I live in Florida. In Florida, it takes both parties to consent to
Hmm.
record a conversation. So, sure enough, I read something that came from AI and it said, in Florida, only one party has to consent. Well, that isn't actually true. It said one party has to consent, but in these certain circumstances. Our circumstance wasn't one of those exceptions to the law. The actual law is a two-party consent. So, I read that and it was before it went to a client. I said, wait a minute, where did we get this? And sure enough, it came right out of something that AI pulled. I said, you
Interesting.
cannot rely on that kind of stuff. As lawyers, we still have to be the lawyers. We
Right.
still have to do our jobs.
So, what is your long-term, I guess, kind of prognostication or forecast for the usage of AI in a law firm specifically? Do you think it's going to simply make your existing lawyers more efficient and productive, or is it a tool to essentially, reduce the number of associate headcount you have in a firm?
So I don't think it's going to reduce the number of associates in our firm because of the way we operate. What I think it's going to do, yeah, I mean, I think what it's really going to do is we are going to see better drafting. The inability to creatively and craftily use the English language has dissipated some in the legal world. And so we're going to see some better drafting and some interesting drafting. Um,
Okay.
we will see that that the young associates who do well are people who understand and know how to use the technology, but they are going to have to first learn how to be lawyers. And in order to
Right.
learn how to be lawyers, they're going to need to get feedback from older lawyers. And they're going to need to have a little thick skin, like I did as a young lawyer, and take that
Yep.
feedback and look at it and not fight for the sake of fighting, but understand why they're getting the feedback they're getting. Lawyers are trained to think. And the most important thing that we can do is make sure that the next generation knows how to think. Because if they can't, they won't know how to prompt. You might as well not go to law school. We'll have consumers. I get it
Exactly.
all the time. Clients send me a document and say, hey, I did this through AI. Can you just confirm and tell me if it's okay? My answer is really simple. I'm sure it's an okay document. I have no idea if it does what you want it to do because I don't, if you want me to help you get the transaction and get the things you need covered in your contract, then we got to talk about what's the transaction, what are the goals, what's your purpose behind this transaction, and now let's talk about what we need to do to prompt it properly. If not, garbage in, garbage out. You'll get an agreement. It won't have typos. It'll be grammatically
Interesting.
correct. It
Yeah.
it will technically do what you said. Oh, I'm going to sell my business to Bob, and Bob's going to buy my business, and the price is going to be $50. Those kinds of things will be right, but what's not there might be more important than what is there.
Right. Rochelle, you just articulated a a common thread among the feelings of AI within our podcast guests in our podcast community in small and mid-sized businesses, right? And that is that they're not looking. The AI is not going to replace our people.
Right.
People who know AI are going to replace our people. And
Right.
you just brought that comment out pretty clearly. I think it's a really interesting approach, and especially for a business that is is so focused on the terminologies and the documentations being legally sound rather than just a tool to be to make your team more efficient is very interesting, and I think this will be a good podcast for our audience to listen to and hear. So, Rochelle, is there any last piece of it? You've had such a varied career from corporate law to you're running your own law firm to joining a larger firm. What's a last piece of advice for our small and mid-sized businesses here on the Think Small podcast as they navigate their ways through these crazy worlds?
I would say don't be afraid to try something. Don't be afraid to learn. And when it doesn't work out, or if it isn't exactly right for you, don't be afraid to end it and move forward quickly, because our
Mm,
world moves fast. I tell people all the time, we live in a global economy. We live in a global communications world. Pay attention to what you say and how you say it, because people are listening, if nothing else. Your phone and Google and Amazon are all listening. So,
very true.
be careful what you take pictures of. Be careful what you publish.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all very sound advice for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Rochelle Walk, she's the managing partner of the Tampa office for Aegis Law. Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us today on the Think Small podcast. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rob. It was a pleasure being with you, and look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?